What's up, sons? It's Blind Run with Son of a Tech once again, and I have lately been obsessed with a game called Warframe.
Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's do this.
I'm not the only one either, as if you go pull up the Steam charts, you'll see that it is currently top 5 with 100,000 people playing at any given time. So that's a concurrent player count right there. And there's a good reason why. Warframe is one of the most fair free-to-play games currently out, and it's a ton of fun, especially if you enjoy basically sci-fi ninjas in space fighting bad guys. It's pretty cool. There's also just a ton of other stuff going on with it, but I had two questions in particular. The first was, could my Ryzen 5 2400G run this game without a discrete GPU at 1080p with 60 FPS or more? And if it couldn't, which settings would be most beneficial for me to turn off to increase my frame rate? So to start things off, let's talk about the system. The test system is a Ryzen 5 2400G, and the core clock on the APU side, which would be the graphics card or the graphics portion of it, is clocked at 1500 megahertz. The memory clock of the GPU will match the system memory clock, and in this case, it's a set of G-Skill Flare X clocked at 3200 megahertz. Now, the game itself, as well as the operating system it's running on, which is Windows 10, is running off an ADATA NVMe drive, and it's a 500 gigabyte. Now, the benchmark run itself is actually on the Plains of Eidolon. There's a couple reasons for this, but primarily it has both day and night cycles. I can play it in solo mode, and I don't have to really worry about a whole bunch of enemies. I can find a section at the beginning and run straight forward and run straight back. Now, of course, enemies are going to change the frame rates, and that is primarily going to be our biggest concern, but what we're wanting to do is get some comparison frames here so that we can see which settings would affect everything the most. All of that being said, let's talk about the results for the Ryzen 5 2400G. At 1080p on the low preset, we had 119 frames per second on the average, with a 67 frames per second 1% lows. So basically, you're going to see an above 60 FPS experience at low at all times. But what if I want to go ahead and see how many of those frames are getting me out of that 60 FPS sweet spot? Well, you can take a look at this chart, which is the chart for the time between frames. Basically, when you're looking at this, take a look at each individual dot. That represents a frame that we recorded, essentially. Now, every single frame needs to be at 16.7 or below on milliseconds to basically maintain 60 FPS. And taking a look at this chart, you'll see that we only have about 5 frames that fall below it, which is a lot less than even 0.1%. Good news is you hardly ever notice it. Now, if we are closer to that 33.4 milliseconds at the top, you would be seeing an average of 30 FPS, just to give you guys an idea of how this chart works. I hope that it's a good visual representation. It helps me, especially when I'm benchmarking and looking for performance differences, and I hope it helps you as well. Finally, if I wanted to go ahead and get a better visual experience out of this game and kind of bump some of the settings up from low, which ones could I do? Well, basically to test this, I used the Ryzen 5 2400G as well as an RX 580 on the test bench, which you can check out up here, and an NVIDIA GTX 1060 3GB. We tested basically, like I said earlier, that benchmark run for each setting for each of these cards. I did do the portion for the Ryzen 5 2400G on my Twitch channel for a little bit, and you can check out my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/sonovatech_, where when I have time and the house is quiet enough, I will do some of the benchmarking live over there. Now, that being said, the chart that we're going to throw up is going to be called the percent in change of FPS. So what does that mean? Well, that means that by setting, we have listed out how many frames per second you'll be able to gain from a percentage perspective. And this is because you're not going to be able to go ahead and say turn this setting off and get 10 frames per second, because there are multiple variables there. So basically, if you're looking at this, and let's say you're running currently at 100 frames per second and you want to be running at 120 frames per second for your sweet new 120 hertz monitor. In this case, you're going to go through basically this chart and look for two settings that will net you a 20% gain in FPS, and turn those all the way off. Inversely, if you're looking at getting better visual fidelity and you're running at 100 FPS but you only have a 60 hertz monitor, go ahead and turn on the settings that add up to 40%. And then you'll be close to that 60% range. Of course, this isn't a perfect science, and there will be some variables there, including, of course, your CPU and so on, but it's a pretty good idea of what you can do to get more frames out of your Warframe. Starting things off though today, you'll see that color correction and high shader quality offer no change in frame rate, so feel free to leave them on. Tessellation is within margin of error, which is below 1%, and I would say you can leave it on if you prefer. Trilinear filtering offers a 2% change, while dynamic lighting offers a 3% change, along with another 3% for volumetric lighting. This is the same as well for particle system quality, which is actually an interesting one and is the one they changed most recently in May when they dropped support for NVIDIA PhysX. Super awesome to see that. Now, the character shadows offer another 3% change, and adaptive exposure is another 3.6% change. Constant weapon trail offers a 3.8% change, but with a caveat. In this case, it's only going to affect frame rate if you have your melee weapon equipped. So if you're currently running around with an SMG or a sniper rifle or a shotgun or a sidearm, it's not going to actually affect anything. However, as soon as you pull that weapon out or pull the melee weapon out, it will affect your frame rate by that amount. Now, texture memory is another curious one that we do have to talk about. It only affects the frame rate by 4%, but that's on cards with 3 GB of VRAM or more. And I do need to do some more testing on this in particular, because it seems like the max at 1080p you're going to ever get won't even get you close to that 2 GB of VRAM. So unless you're running a GPU that's 2 GB of VRAM or less, then it's only going to net you about a 4% change. And that's just because it's not using that much, and this has to do with the amount of memory for the textures that you're running. Now, this is also going to change as you move up in, of course, resolution to the 1440p and 4K. So this one is probably a lot less accurate than I would like it to be, and is worth mentioning some of the detail there. Shadow quality will offer a 5.1% change in FPS, and reflections a 6% change in FPS. Geometry detail will offer about a 6% change as well, and GPU particles is another 6% change, which is also directly related to the NVIDIA PhysX portion there. Ambient occlusion will net you another 10.3% change, while anti-aliasing will offer a 10.6% change, keeping in mind that anti-aliasing is highly affected by resolution and pixels per inch. So let's say you're running at 4K on a 32-inch or smaller screen, you're not going to really need anti-aliasing on, so go ahead and grab that extra FPS. On the other, or the flip side of that coin, if you're running 1080p on a 27-inch or larger screen, you're probably going to want some anti-aliasing to smooth out those edges. And then you'll want to take that 10% hit on your frame rate. Depth of field is one that a lot of PC gamers don't enjoy, and unless you want to really get immersed into the artistic style of the games or the developer's vision for the titles, it's really not necessary. And in a grindy game like Warframe, I wouldn't necessarily say you need it on. It'll also net you 11.6% in frames, and that's just going to be something that is highly beneficial. And as a PC gamer myself, and speaking to a lot of other PC gamers, this is a gimme of just turn off and get the extra FPS. Now, anisotropic filtering is very similar to anti-aliasing and is going to be heavily dependent on the resolution of your monitor as well as the size of your monitor. So turn it on, turn it off, and see what looks better depending on the size of your monitor, and go ahead and grab that 11% gain in frame rate or lose it. Now, high dynamic range is not actually high dynamic range. High dynamic range in this case is actually kind of the old version of it, which is more of a filter setting than anything else. It'll basically help mimic darker blacks, etc. But it's not really great quality, and at a 12.5% change in FPS, this is one I would recommend turning off. Finally, there's motion blur, which almost nobody wants turned on in their PC games. It'll grab you nearly 13% gain in FPS, and most PC gamers are going to want to turn that off immediately. So if you're currently running, at around 90 to 100 frames per second, and you want to get up to 120 Hertz, my recommendations would definitely be to just go ahead and turn off motion blur and high dynamic range, following those up with depth of field. And that will in total grab you, if you're at 100 frames per second, about 30 FPS, which is just phenomenal. Go ahead and look through this and play with the settings yourself. I would like to hear and see what you guys have on yours down in the comment section below. And I would also like to hear from you guys. Do you like motion blur? Do you like depth of field? Do you like one and not like the other? What's your thoughts on, of course, those various settings? Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this type of video. If you did, don't forget to like, and I hope to have some more coming out here shortly. If you guys want to join me on Twitter, I'm at SonOfATech, as well as my Discord and Patreon links are in the description below. All of these charts went up early on my Patreon. If you want to go ahead and support me over there, feel free. $1 will get you access to the charts early. Of course, I need to start watermarking them. I forgot to do that this time. Oh well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday.
Conditions satisfied. Engaging purge preset.